Hello and welcome to Absolutely Not. My name is Katrina Stroll. My pronouns are they, she, he, and you can learn more about me at my website, www.katrinastroll.com. Real quick, if y'all appreciate the work that I do here or elsewhere, please visit the Support the Mission page of my website. There are several options to choose from, so please choose one. The keywords for this episode are pay equity, discrimination, and retaliation. I encourage y'all to look up the definitions of these words and to compare them from the definitions that you carry with you on a daily basis. If you need help comparing, please let me know. This episode is sponsored by Headspace. Headspace has one mission. Okay. The Headspace has one mission: to improve the health and happiness of the world through meditation, sleep, stress, and mindfulness. Find out more about Headspace at the link in the show notes. Today's episode is titled The Lowest Paid Person in the Room. Yes, soak it in, sip it, sip, sip, sip it. I'm excited to go over this topic with my amazing special guest, Travell Williams, he, him, his. Born and raised on the west side of Chicago, Illinois, Travell likes to make things, whether it be products, computer programs, poems, or culinary delights. He finds joy in bringing ideas to life. Currently, he is on his own epic journey with his partner towards self-reliance and growth. He identifies as Black and queer. Thank you so much for being here today.
No, thank you for this space and inviting me into it.
I am excited to speak today, and everyone, I apologize for the small person in the background, but they're doing what they're doing. I do want to get into today's topic of the lowest paid person in the room. Travell, have you been the lowest paid person in the room?
I mean, for some years, I've been the lowest paid person in the room, both knowingly and unknowingly.
If you don't mind me asking, what's the difference? Does it matter if you know or don't know?
I think it does. So unknowingly, it kind of leaves you in this position of not having to do anything or assume responsibility for that, because you don't necessarily know what's happening to you. But once you're aware that you are the lowest paid person in the room, I think from there, it becomes about how are you going to respond? What are you going to do for yourself? What does your safety look like? Because then you begin recognizing, oh, this is what my workload looks like compared to another member's workload who may be getting paid or lower, or these may be the racial gender dynamics that are creating this situation for me. So yeah, I do think that there is a difference, and the difference is based on that. That's what I think.
And I love that you're pointing out, like, as soon as you know you have a responsibility, there comes some accountability. Was that something you came up to your own conclusion, or you had to figure that out on your own?
I had to figure it out on my own. And essentially it was because, okay, it's levels to this, right? So there's, and you really don't have the tools or means or networks to do anything about it. And then there is, and you have every right, all the means, all the tools to take it on. There was a time when I knew I was underpaid compared to everyone else that I was working with. But I didn't necessarily have the relationships, the language, the tools, the networks to do anything about it. I was in an hourly job getting paid $19.95 an hour. And I didn't have any network within the company. I didn't really understand my rights around pay. And when I brought some of these things up to my manager or began to try to talk about them, I didn't have the language. And that was in a lower paid role. But once I entered into a different phase of my career where I was making a lot more money, and my networks were primed where these kind of conversations were always happening. I was encountering data. I had access to legal representation. Then I was like, yo, what the fuck? This is my responsibility to make sure I'm getting my money. How am I going to leverage the now tools I have to do something about it?
And I truly cannot thank you enough for breaking down what is needed to even start the process. You said understanding, you said language, you said networking, you said tools, you said legal representation.
Yeah.
Were
Yeah.
you aware of everything that you needed to begin even talking about this?
I wasn't. I was not, and I can be a bit more specific about. Hey, Veronica, I could be a bit more specific about like what led me to this knowledge. Essentially, I had moved from what would be considered a support role into a high-paying tech role that everybody's trying to get, and it was great in the sense that I had ownership of my ideas. I got to choose my work in many ways. I had huge influence on the team. When I made the transition between the roles, I did attempt to negotiate, but the organizational dynamics set my salary at a particular way, in a particular way. It was because I was an internal employee already, there were a bunch of things I was already running up against. They were like, well, we can only give you a raise to this amount because then you began influencing all this other stuff, and we got to look at the team. All this bullshit. First red flag, because what no one ever tells you is behind every process is a person. So when I was receiving that information, it was not necessarily the process that I was getting that from. There was a person who was implementing this policy to begin with, and I didn't do the work on my end, again, because I didn't know to chase that down. Upon moving into this new high-paying role, I thought shit was good. Like, I'm doing my work, contributing. I'm doing jobs that not even in the fucking description, and training and all this other shit. And I began to notice a colleague, white woman, began to take my ideas and produce them. And I approached this colleague on 2 occasions being like, yo, this not cool. I'm not gonna say it in public. I don't want you to feel bad about yourself, but this, I'm not getting credit for my work essentially. And the reason that was important for me was because I had went from a low paid role to this kind of job where in order to get promoted to the next level, they were gonna look at like, how was I producing? Not necessarily my metrics in terms of I've talked to this number of people or I've delivered this number of things. It was, okay, how are your ideas impacting the growth of the company? And in doing that and having that conversation, I wasn't being heard at all by that colleague. They kept doing the same behaviors. I escalated to my leadership. My leadership kept sweeping it under the rug. But if I were to put language to it, everybody in my life at the time was pacifying me around this issue. I was being told that this wasn't plagiarism. I was overreacting. This is some other crazy ass shit I heard, like, oh, we're a team, so your ideas just get absorbed into the team. And so that should just be something you live with or whatever. And so, like every other Black queer person without a voice, I took to forums such as Twitter, LinkedIn, all these spaces that I did have access and attention given to me. And I began to talk about the things that were happening to me without naming anybody. And it caught traction. And from that, the company, my leadership, several people began to tell me like, yo, if you keep talking about this stuff that is happening to you, your pay could be impacted when it's time for raises or when you move to another state. I didn't know that nobody was supposed to be saying this shit to me. That is against the law. And so, like, there were several other things that ended up occurring where I got that knowledge and I learned that. And I began to say that back to them. And that's when the organization realized, like, oh, this motherfucker ain't one for none. So immediately once I got that knowledge and began letting them know that, there were these dynamics that were put in place by the organization to silence me, essentially. And the way that really, really large, crazy ass organizations do or manage these kinds of things is, there's a whole backdoor, sometimes legal process or review process where they are looking and deciding on how to respond and how organizations respond to pay equity issues. When employees raise them, look different across the board. They may want to settle with you. They may want to give you sort of these extended privileges or move you to another team. But oftentimes, especially in my case, there was never the primary issue I was raising hell that was never addressed. The fact that this person was essentially taking my labor and growing their career off of it, no one to this day has done anything about that. And so while like I went through the process, got this knowledge, was able to see some sort of impact or some sort of resolve, the primary thing that was hurting me was never resolved.
I cannot thank you enough for sharing these experiences here, because so many of us have been in these same situations. And the step one you talked about, like, this is happening and nobody is addressing this, we could have nipped it in the bud then, like, oh, y'all do not care about me. Like, I don't need to go through all this trauma. I know now that you do not care about me. At what point in the process did you realize, like, oh, this is never going to get resolved?
Oh, I knew it was never going to get resolved when I came up for review for HR about the post about what was happening to me, and the employee that was committing the plagiarism was still able to go to work and all this other stuff. It got bad to a point where during the quote unquote investigation, I was actually given the opportunity to take time off, right? Like they came to me and they said, while we're looking at this, you may want to, for the safety of yourself and the team, we're gonna let you have this time away. And essentially, that's when I knew y'all don't give a fuck at all. Y'all ain't about to do anything. And my mind began to collect evidence because I was coming to people with my raw emotion, hoping that they would acknowledge that, you know, I was being impacted in a very deep way that was core to who I am. I care about my ideas. I care about people acknowledging them. I care about the impact of those ideas on the world. So once I figured that out, I started collecting evidence. And instead of coming to folks with my raw emotion, it became, look, this is what is happening. This is like the act, like I was giving people actual artifacts. And from how people were responding to me, that's when I knew there were so many people that didn't give a fuck. They were saying, oh, well, people do that. If I was in college or high school and someone was plagiarizing my work, I would be dismissed from some institutions. Like Princeton University is a perfect example. They have a honors code or integrity code where some tests you're allowed to take without a professor in the room. And the assumption is that you're gonna operate off of this ethics that you're not gonna plagiarize anybody. But if they find out, they dismissing your ass because it's a institution committed to intellectual integrity. And you can't have intellectual integrity if people plagiarize them. But back to the point, let's walk that back. How people responded to me was a complete indicator. And that's what led me to entering into therapy. I had to begin finding my safe spaces and also creating my own, because the spaces that I had been using were all connected to my workplace. So they weren't those relationships, most of the relationships in my life were tied to work. So anytime I was talking to people about what was happening or trying to enter into discussions. I was being pacified. People were telling me that it's small. And when I went to my therapist and just unloaded with all the things that were happening to me at the time, it took my therapist saying, this ain't normal. This ain't supposed to be happening to you. And that is when I began like a whole nother path.
I am so thankful that you were able to find spaces outside of those relationships. And to anybody listening to this, I hope this was your wake up call, like to very much look at the relationships that you are in right now and say, wow, they all stem from the same place, or they all stem from the same organization. They all stem from the same foundation. You need to do else. You need spaces that are not all connected, because we are multifaceted. We exist outside of the four walls of payment and bills, apparently so, and we need those spaces. I love that you talked about the dynamics that occurred, or that when you started going through the process, what dynamics became more visible to you when you started the process?
Yeah, one of the things I had noticed was this sort of thing that happens with narcissists, particularly, and not saying like the people who were around me were narcissists or anything like that, but essentially what some narcissists will do is they will like pacify or cold you or whatever, and still proceed to do the thing that is hurting you. And that was what was happening to me, and I didn't know how to identify that dynamic, simply because I'm a person that I tend to I'm gullible. I believe what people tell me, and I believe that people will see my humanity and do the best to pour into that. But that was one of the first dynamics. I also noticed that, and I want to talk a lot more on the company's end. I noticed that like all of a sudden I was having conversations with executives and VPs, and all of these people were beginning to like pay attention to me in this crazy way. And from that, I didn't know on the back end that these people were being involved in the decisioning process towards what would be happening. So like, here's how I think of it. In companies, we like to think that there's an independent review process or some kind of like legal person who's following up, or an HR person that is doing their due diligence or something like that. But nobody ever like seriously considers that the time it takes to hire an executive, for them to perform all that stuff, companies don't want to lose that. Executives don't want to lose their power. And a lot of these people have the means and ability by way of their institutional power to corrupt a lot of these processes, to jump in review processes and protect themselves. Like when executives come up for sexual assault, or having said something crazy to an employee, or calling somebody a nigga or some shit, nobody knows on the back end, instead of the company being responsive to the person who has been harmed, the company is attempting to protect its own best interest by protecting its executives. And that was something I had to learn. I had to like literally sit down, start meditating. I even got like a notebook where I like drew connections between things, like outlining how power was operating in a lot of these exchanges.
I love all these words that you are using: dynamics, exchanges, relationships, backdoor, because a lot of it is not visible to us. And I love that you said this earlier: behind every process is a person. Behind everything is a person. Just because it's in black and white written down doesn't mean a person did not come up with that concept. You have to question the person. You have to question the integrity of the people within that organization. They're here to make money, baby. They do not care about you. And I love that you're letting people know that. There was a time when I just kept thinking to myself, I was in the same predicament, like, why y'all ain't fired her yet? Like, why y'all ain't fired her yet? And it didn't click for me. What were you doing during that time? I'm assuming you had that time too. Like, why haven't y'all fired this person yet? What were you doing during that time? Making the web, for
lack of a better word, going crazy. going crazy. And that is why, like, I love my therapist. I'm not gonna put her out there, but I'm gonna just say, like, the tools in the space, I can't emphasize. Like, you're talking about the language I'm using, a lot of that language came from her. She would give me books to read, activities to do. There were therapy appointments that I would just show up to, and she said, do you just want to cry? We could just use this time to cry. Do you want to take a nap? Like, we could use this time to take a nap. And I think that, like, that's what I was doing during that time. And I was fortunate to have people in my life who were willing to step in spaces where I couldn't. Like, they were willing to come through with tools. I like to say I got a lot of like Black corporate aunties, because I do. I don't know what it is about my energy, but I tend to attract, like, these Black women who are very convicted about doing great things in the world and using their power for good. And they just rain down on me, checking in on me. Like, and one of them, they commented on the post, Tony, like, she was checking in with me almost every fucking day, being like, how you doing, bro? What's going on? What you need? Who we got to get in contact with? What needs to happen? Like, or you should do this. So I think, like, that's what I was doing. I was going crazy in therapy, and my Black corporate aunties and my partner was coming in, like, giving me the shit I needed to fight.
I love that you mentioned Tony. And for anybody who doesn't know, please look into the post about this episode, and please follow her, because she's an amazing advocate, not only for Black people, but Black queer people.
Yes.
Specifically. And I love that you talked about your identities and how important it is that people who are supporting you share the same identities as you. Because you talked about the person who was plagiarizing you did not share the same identities as you. Was it important for you to find people that shared the same identity as you for support?
Yeah, I think it's always important. And I know that there are, like, arguments to this where people are like, oh, we can flip flop. White people could do therapy or whatever for Black people, or all that bullshit. I know all that. But for me, for my truth, there's a specific history that informs my present, both personal, both systematic, legal, all that shit. And in order to even begin to unpack what was happening to me, that context was needed. Because what a lot of people missed in what I was saying is that essentially I was another Black person that a white person was about to fell up on. And that has been happening historically. So you have this thing where that Black people have experienced on a macro level, like, damn, we always getting our shit taken, or we're always getting our labor absorbed in this fucked up way. And then there's a very personal, like, version of that was happening to me. Tony, when I got on the phone with her, she understood. Like, she knew. My Black corporate aunties, they understood. My partner, he understood. And that's what allowed them to say, okay, we're not going to pacify you. We're going to give you tools to fight this. Everybody else was trying to pacify me. And then on the back end, do the shit that was still harming me. And it was happening both in my personal life and like, it was all kinds of crazy fucked up shit that was happening.
I'm so sorry you had to experience this, but I'm so glad people were willing, specifically people from the community are always constantly willing to be like, this is fucked up. I've probably already been through it, and I know exactly the steps to take.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you are sharing this today also reminds me, and I'm constantly reminded of this, that this information is not readily available to anyone, like to anyone. White people, for some reason, they don't have to go through the process because they're already given the benefit of the doubt. So they never often don't have to go through this process. But even the information on dynamics, the back door stuff that's happening, the words that we are using today, the language, you had to go to therapy, you had to get support. Why do you think this information is just not readily available to everybody?
Yeah, I don't think I don't want to eliminate myself from that. I think, no, I believe that there are particular things that we don't understand or care about until it happens to us, right? So it's like people don't start seeking community until they need it. And usually when they start seeking community, that's when they're having trouble building it. So I was immersed in like a world where I was getting these statistics. I was seeing pay equity stuff. I was seeing like that it was going to take 300 some odd years for Black women to catch up or whatever. I was still going to work like like shit wasn't happening. And so I think what it really takes is for people to go through it themselves to come out on the other side to understand how bleak and severe the situation around pay equity is for people, and specifically for Black, queer, poor people, for trans people, for like all of these marginalized identities. We ain't getting our money and they're playing in our face about the shit.
I hope you heard that. To whoever needed to hear that message, it is in your face right now. Please don't wait till you get to the end of the rope to start implementing these processes, to start asking people, hey, who's behind this fucking process that has to do with my paycheck? I would love to know that person now before, because I don't have time. To the people that are listening to this and thinking, you know what? It has literally started here. I have started this process and I need to get ready. I need to start building community. I need to know what to do. What would be the top 3 tips you would share with them about getting started?
So top of the list is gonna be get you a safe space, get you a champion, get you somebody who you could go to and say and just vent, and also have them look at the details of what you're going through. Like just get you that shit first. Second is understanding the game, like knowing what the process is that you're going through, whether it's a review, an internal review, or your pay being decided. Like, what are the rules? What are the checks and balances? Who decides that? Who is behind that? How do you track the flow of that? That's the other one. And then the third one is starting to build like actual tools. I would say talk to a lawyer if you can when you're dealing with this stuff. A lot of people like to like go about it themselves. And I was unfortunate in being able to secure like solid legal representation, because a lot of these issues are built around like, some lawyers are like, how much can I get? Can I win? Does this look like a winning situation? All those dynamics or whatever. But if you get the chance, like shop around and ask these lawyers. I was using my rejections from law firms as fuel for how I needed to proceed. Like they were giving me the language to go back and be like, yo, there is a problem here. And I would use that. So those are my 3 tips.
Not once has anyone shared this type of information in this space. Like not once. And I am grateful that you have shared it today, because that just means there are so many people who haven't hit that wall yet, who haven't been like, you know what, I need more money. But it is time for everyone to say that. Go ahead.
I want to add a 4th tip, because we skirted over the whole thing. Ask motherfuckers how much they getting paid. Like, it is okay to ask that information. That's the only way I knew some crazy shit was happening to me. And a lot of companies, a lot of places just aren't gonna let you know. So that's the 4th tip. Like, get some kind of perspective on like what pay looks like for your role, your region, your level, your type of work. Get all that shit and ask people, ask individuals, and also share. I share my pay openly with anybody who asks or want to know. When I use social media a lot more seriously, I used to post it. I used to be like, yo, this is how much I get paid.
I love when people do that. a post comes to mind. I think it was Pavel Martinez, him, who was an amazing person, like literally worked for TikTok and posted like, this is how much money I make. Paid transparency is super important to me. And so for everyone who's thinking, no, I'm not that bold, you're saving people's lives. You are saving heartache and stress and pain and strife by being transparent. Plus, if that organization, for whatever reason, is saying, y'all need to stop talking about money, there's obviously a reason why we can't talk about how much I'm getting paid. Why? What's the reason? We'll figure it out together. But thank you so much for sharing everything you've shared today. This has been insightful, and somebody is going to bust into somebody's office tomorrow and have a conversation. Are there any last minute sprinkles you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you, but I do want to emphasize, like, my therapist, therapy, my partner, my work aunties, my corporate Black aunties, like, get you people that are for you. Choose things that choose you.
Ooh, write it down. Write that down. Things that choose you. Thank you so much for this amazing episode. To anybody who's listening to this, I hope you start being choosy tomorrow, but keep setting those boundaries and saying absolutely not to everything unaligned. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.